Sometimes life does not overwhelm you in one dramatic moment. It pulls you away from yourself quietly, little by little. One more thought, one more demand, one more emotion you try to handle too quickly. And after a while, everything starts to feel too much. Not only because life is heavy, but because you have been carrying it without staying connected to yourself. A lot of people do not fall apart loudly. They still show up, they still answer messages, they still keep functioning from the outside. But inside, they feel scattered, overstimulated, and strangely far from themselves. That is what makes this experience so hard to explain. Nothing looks completely broken, yet everything feels harder to hold. And the deeper problem is not only pressure, it is disconnection. When your mind keeps reacting, absorbing, and adjusting without pause, your inner world never gets a chance to settle. That is when life starts to feel like too much, even when no single moment seems big enough to justify it.
The quiet way people lose themselves.
Most people think losing yourself looks dramatic. They imagine a breakdown, a crisis, or a moment where everything clearly falls apart. But more often, it happens in quieter ways. You lose yourself when you keep reacting before you have time to feel. You lose yourself when every message feels urgent. Every emotion becomes a command. And every uncomfortable moment pushes you into immediate action. From the outside, this can still look normal. You are productive, responsible, available, but internally, something begins to thin out. Your attention gets pulled in too many directions. Your body stays tense. Your mind never fully lands. And slowly, you stop living from your center. You start living from interruption, pressure, and reaction. That is why so many people feel exhausted without understanding why. They are not only tired from life, they are tired from being pulled away from themselves. Again and again, in very small moments.
Why everything starts to feel like too much.
When everything feels like too much, people often assume they are becoming weak, overly emotional, or bad at coping. But that is usually not the real problem. The real problem is that your system has been asked to absorb more than it has been allowed to process. Too many thoughts, too many demands, too many emotional signals, too little space to settle. You move from one input to the next without ever fully returning to yourself. That is what creates the feeling of internal overload. It is not always one major event that breaks your balance. It is the accumulation of unfinished reactions. A message you never digested. A pressure you never released. A fear you kept carrying into the next hour. Over time, your nervous system stops feeling safe in stillness. It stays slightly activated, slightly braced, slightly ready for the next thing. And when your inner world never gets to soften, even ordinary life can start to feel heavier than it really is.
What really makes you ungrounded?
What makes people feel ungrounded is not only stress itself. It is the habit of reacting too quickly to stress. The moment something feels uncomfortable, the mind rushes to fix, explain, predict, control, or escape. That speed creates distance between you and your own center. You are no longer responding from clarity. You are responding from activation. And the more often that happens, the more normal it begins to feel. You start believing that urgency means importance. You start thinking every feeling needs immediate action. You start treating every inner disturbance as something that must be solved right now. But that is exactly how you lose your balance. Because the issue is not just what happens to you. It is how quickly you leave yourself in order to deal with it. Many people look calm on the outside and still feel ungrounded within. They are not chaotic in visible ways. They are simply too easy to pull away from themselves. And after a while, that quiet inner disconnection becomes its own kind of exhaustion.
What grounded people do differently?
Grounded people are not people with perfect lives. They still feel pressure. They still get hurt. They still have overwhelming days. The difference is not that life touches them less. The difference is that they do not abandon themselves as quickly when it does. They create a small pause between what they feel and what they do next. They do not trust every first thought. They do not obey every first emotion. They let the wave pass through their body before they decide what deserves a response. That pause may only last a few seconds, but it changes everything. It keeps them connected to choice. Instead of asking, "How do I fix this immediately?" they learn to ask, "How do I come back to myself first?" That is what grounded people protect. Not the illusion of control, but the relationship with their own inner center. They understand that sensitivity is not the problem. The real danger is losing contact with yourself every time life becomes intense.
How to return to yourself when life feels overwhelming.
The first step is to notice the moment you are leaving yourself. Your breathing gets shallow, your thoughts speed up, everything starts to feel urgent. Instead of reacting immediately, slow the reaction down, not because the problem does not matter, but because your state matters first. Then come back to the body. Feel your feet, lower your shoulders, let one breath become slower than the last. This is how you interrupt the momentum of overwhelm. And once you are slightly more present, ask a better question. Not, how do I make all of this disappear? But, what is actually true right now? And what really needs my attention now? That question brings you back to reality. And reality is often gentler than the storm your mind was creating.
The cost of living too far from yourself.
Sometimes the hardest part is that no one can see this happening. From the outside, you may still look fine. You still reply, you still work, you still keep moving. And because of that, even you may not realize how disconnected you have become. You just call it stress. You call it being tired. You call it a busy week. But deep down, what you are really feeling is the cost of living too far away from yourself for too long. That is why returning to yourself matters so much. Not because it makes life instantly easy, but because it stops life from quietly consuming all of your inner space. It gives you a place to stand again, a place to think from, a place to feel from, a place to respond from. And when you have that, even difficult moments stop feeling like they own you completely. They may still affect you, but they no longer get to define your whole inner world. Maybe the goal is not to become unshakable. Maybe the goal is to stop leaving yourself every time life becomes intense. Because grounded people are not the ones who feel nothing. They are the ones who know how to come back to themselves before pressure, emotion, and noise take over completely. And that return changes everything. It changes how you think, how you respond, and how much of yourself you lose in the process. If this spoke to something you have been feeling quietly, let me know in the comments. Have you been overwhelmed by life lately? Or disconnected from yourself?